we get a lot of comments from people, and we're the ones conducting the research, and we're the ones risking everything to go in the field. And so when we get these comments, most of the time it's easy to understand that people don't know what's going on. And here in America, man, our media is famous for blowing things out of proportion or twisting things around. So the Bigfoot subject is no exception. I mean, you look at any report and you're going to see all kinds of doubt cast on it. And for the eyewitness, it's not that way, obviously. And so we try to take those opinions, as for what they are. It's ignorance, is what it is. Either you've seen it, or you're aware of it, or you're not. And if you're not, more than likely you have an opinion that this doesn't even matter. It's not important. I can assure you, when you begin to really look into what this ultimately represents, it then begins to get very clear how important this should be to science. I mean, what we're talking about is an aboriginal species of hominid that occupies North America. We're talking about a keystone species that essentially affects the entire wilderness of the continent of North America. We're talking about a possible example of pre-human that we could have evolved from an evolutionary scientific standpoint. We're talking about something that literally existed on this continent before the American Indians came, watched the European settlers come and decimate the American Indian populations across the entire country, watched them displaced from the bushes. And along the way, you have interactions with those European settlers. We have accounts. If this stuff was going on, would we have accounts? Yes. In point of fact, we do. We have records of accounts from both sides, from the American Indians and the European settlers. In fact, if you go into these areas, these same exact areas that the American Indians 1,000 years ago talked about Sasquatch occupying, and you look at the European settlers' accounts, they're in the same spot today in modern times. You have the same exact type of accounts coming out of the same exact areas. The only thing that's changed is the people who claim ownership over the actual property. They're still seeing Bigfoot in the exact same places all over this country. And with that trend continuing, it's ludicrous for us to even think that biology or biologists at some level that are tasked with studying these areas don't have conclusive evidence that there is a keystone species of hominid in taking up residence in these areas. We've witnessed some of the most incredible things that I never even thought that this was possible, right? And the way I go about this is very simple. I just do it. I just go out there. You know what I mean? And when you're in the right spot, if they're there, then you're gonna start to experience things. And what that experience and being in these areas has taught us is quite a bit. First of all, they're highly adaptive. They can be in the water or they can be on land. And that's something I never even, I just wouldn't have thought that was possible if they were real to begin with. But we can show you footage that they're in the water and they use that water. We've seen them in these areas tearing trees down and throwing them in the water. You will actually see trees, whole full date palms that have been placed in the water. And it's interesting because you find them where you find hog and deer tracks. You don't find them in places where there are no tracks. You start finding deer tracks or hog tracks, or you see signs where a group of hogs have come through and have torn up the ground. And it's the only place that you've seen any of this hog sign or deer sign. And right there are two palm trees that have been ripped out of the ground and they're in the water. Why? Why is that? First of all, there's no people tearing trees down out there. It's illegal, It's illegal to do that. You can't damage the environment, man. And here, these are the spots that we catch the Bigfoot on film. And so when we started to really notice these things, it was like, what are they doing here? Why is this happening? And we started to pay close attention to what was going on. And you would see the hog tracks in that same spot where those two trees were thrown in the water for about 2 or 3 days. And then you wouldn't see hog tracks anymore. not there. We actually studied that for about a week, and then we went back one day and the trees were moved. They actually floated them down the canal bank further, and there was another set of hog tracks and spots where the hogs were tearing the ground up, and the trees were now in front of that. So what we thought at the time was that they were using the trees to conceal themselves so they could get close enough to the bank to where they could just come out of that water and snatch a hog, because the hogs were actually tearing up the ground right next to the canal. So what we're seeing is that these things are problem solving. They're hunting, and they're hunting to agree that a man would figure out how to hunt. And I think that, in looking at all of this stuff, I think the one thing that we've been able to show is that these guys are a lot smarter than most people think. The Sasquatch species appears to be a hunter-gatherer species. And what does that mean? It means, that they hunt. They're omnivores. They eat meat and they eat vegetation. So, how would they hunt? I mean, they don't have rifles, right? They don't have, bow and arrow, anything like that. So for a Sasquatch to go unnoticed by man isn't that difficult, because they're trying to sit still in these bushes so that the deer and the hog will get close enough to them that they can actually pounce on them. They have to kill with their hands. And just having to do that to exist will give you the ability to stay off everything's radar. If you look at the sightings catalog and you go maybe online and you start to look into this, what you're going to see are these happenstance occurrences. These people were, they infringed on their territory, and the Sasquatch chose to allow that individual to know that they were there. And every once in a while, one of them is caught off guard. But if you look at a lot of the behavior that has been witnessed, it suggests that they're in these environments that you can find game. There are plenty of hunters who have had encounters with the species itself, and these people have a very different type of encounter. It's almost as if there's a competition, and the Sasquatch is aware of it, that hunters are competitive for the game that they eat. And their type of encounter is different. At times, it can even be violent. So what is a Bigfoot? I get asked that a lot by people, and I don't have a direct answer for what the species is. I view it personally because of the amount of time that we've spent in the bush filming these guys. And being in the area, experiencing the way they behave. I view them as something that is evolved to the planet. And that's what they show. In our films, you will see some kind of a human primate, a hominoid of some type, that is perfectly adapted to the wet, humid, hot areas of South Florida, the swamps. And although they do seem to prefer being on dry land, they have absolutely no qualms about going in the water. When we're in their environment, they have walked through the water, they've jumped in the water, they've gone under the water. You hear things that really show that they're adapted to being in the water, particularly in the summer months. So they show a high degree of adaptation to Florida's wet environments.